This is Democracy Watch. Okay, so this is a video that Mark and I have been really excited about making because we cover so much of the Republicans' threats to democracy. We know how it can leave people despairing, when in actuality, there's a lot that we can do. So this video is going to be everything that we can be doing 6 months out so that you can help fight back and have some agency here.
And let me just start by saying this is perhaps the most important video that we've ever done. So if you're watching this, please pay attention. People shouldn't feel helpless. People should feel like there are concrete steps they can take. We've done more than 100 videos, and this is the one, if you go, I hope that you will go back to over and over again every time you have despair between now and the election.
Okay, so what we're going to do is kind of put this into buckets. And so we have a few different buckets in terms of how people can be most helpful. The first one we're going to talk about is candidates. So Mark, can you talk about what we can do on the candidate front?
Sure. So, look, the most important thing you can do for campaigns right now is to donate to them. I know that sounds like the least exciting thing, but it's super important. You know, campaigns are very, very expensive, and money in politics matters. You know, we can all talk about whether there should be reforms to the campaign finance system, but money matters in politics, and small donations make a huge difference to these campaigns. But it's important that they get this money early, right? Because they need to be able to plan their spending. So sending someone $25 or $100 in May or June or July is just much more valuable than sending it to them in September or October or the first week of November, because this way they can make smart spending decisions now. Likewise, if you can make a recurring donation to a campaign, that is also very helpful, because again, they can see that this is going to be coming in. Beyond making donations, you ought to be making a plan to vote. Okay, the rules of voting change all the time. It's one of the things, Brian, you and I talk about, but we need people to make sure they understand where they live, what their plan to vote is. And there's no better time than the present for people to check their voter registration. Make sure that they are in fact registered to vote. Nothing's happened to it. Nothing's changed about it. Nothing needs to be updated. Understand whether you can vote early, whether you're going to vote by mail, and understand those things. And then finally, you know, everyone needs to make a plan to vote, and they need to make a plan to vote for the Democratic candidates from top to bottom. So know who they are. In some states, they are prominently identified as the Democrat. In other states, less so. But every one of those Democrats on the ballot will make a difference. You need to start by voting for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Putting them back in office is vital to protecting democracy as we move forward, and they need your vote reliably and consistently. Vote for Senate, for governor, for state house, for Congress, up and down the ballot. Make sure you are voting Democratic. Whatever questions or qualms you may have within the party, those pale in comparison to what will happen if Republicans gain control. So everyone needs to make a plan to vote and vote Democratic up and down the ballot.
I also know that a lot of viewers are getting hit with a barrage of different groups in terms of who they can donate to. Can you talk about the difference in donating directly to a campaign versus a PAC, and which one might be better?
Sure. So from my standpoint, you are always better off giving to a candidate if you know the candidate that you want to support. Why? Because the candidate gets the money and they can use it in the way that is most efficient and most effective for their campaigns. They oftentimes also get discounts in how they spend their money relative to other spenders. So for example, broadcast television stations have to sell time to candidates at a lower rate than they can charge other advertisers, including PACs. That said, for some people, you may say, look, I know I want to support pro-choice Democratic women, and so I want to give to an organization that I know will support pro-choice Democratic women, like Emily's List, that does that around the country. And that's fine if you don't want to have to research candidates, but you know you want a certain issue. You want to support Democratic candidates who are pro-environment or are committed to protect from gun violence. There are lots of organizations that will do that if you don't have the time to research the candidates yourself. And don't forget also to give to the Democratic Party. Democratic state committees, Democratic national committees are all super important because they help build the infrastructure that will allow multiple candidates across the ballot to successfully run campaigns.
Now, I do want to caution that this isn't just about giving money. If you don't have money to give, that is okay. We're going to go through other ways that you can be helpful, that you can be majorly impactful here. So the next one I want to talk about is one that I hold really dear, and that is the family, friends, what Marc calls the town square. So can you talk about that, Marc?
So I'm glad you mentioned this one, because this one may be even more important than the money. In this day and age where there is so much disinformation and misinformation about elections, when there is so much threat to democracy, it is really, really important that people not only make a plan for them to vote and make a donation or volunteer for a campaign, but that they spread that word to their own networks. They tell their friends, their families, their customers, their clients, how important it is that at this moment in history, they stand up for democracy and they vote for Democratic candidates. You'd be surprised. There are people around you who may be afraid of politics right now, or uncertain, or have heard misinformation. And hearing from you that you are a strong supporter of President Biden, that hearing from you all that he has done for you and your community, hearing what a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate will mean for making America a better and more inclusive and fairer society for everyone is so important. Hearing from you why right now it is important to put away the voter intimidators and the misinformationists and understand that you are willing to stand up for democracy and tell people how to vote, what the rules are, how they can have their vote counted, how they register. That is so important. Every person here has a town square that they can go into the middle of and speak out. For people like Brian, that town square includes millions of people like you who watch him on YouTube, who see him on national television. He has an enormous town square, and he uses it for good, to spread good information about voting, to make sure people understand the issues. But that shouldn't mean that you listening to this don't have a town square. It may be your dinner table, your coffee shop. It may be Facebook. It may be Threads. You have an obligation, just like Brian, to post, to talk out, to speak about the importance of voting, voting Democratic, making sure that people stand up and protect democracy. And you all need to do that in your town square.
And just to build on that, I think this is a story that I talk about a lot, and if you've watched my videos, you've heard this. But in 2020, Joe Biden beat Donald Trump in Wisconsin, the tipping point state, by 2 votes per precinct. So don't underestimate the impact that just you reaching out to 1 or 2 or 3 people in your circle can have. All it took was Trump to have flipped 2 people per precinct, and he would have won the 2020 election in Wisconsin. So again, it can't just be up to people who are on TV, on YouTube, who have podcasts, whatever it is. It can't just be up to them to reach out to people, because the fact is that trust in everyone, in politicians, in media figures, is at an all-time low, and that increases the importance of people, family members and friends and neighbors have among each other to deliver this kind of information. So become a tribune for this good information and make 2 or 3 people your responsibility ahead of the next election.
Yeah, and I'll go a step further, and I will tell you, if you're watching this video and you are 20 years old or 30 years old, your children are going to ask you one day, what did you do in 2024 when democracy was at stake? They're not going to ask you what the gas prices were. They're not going to ask you how the stock market did. They're not going to ask you about what was happening on this college campus or that college campus. They're going to ask you, when democracy was at stake, what did you do? If you are in your 40s, if you are in your 50s, and maybe early 60s, your grandchildren are going to ask you someday, what did you do when democracy was at stake? They're not going to want to know about the price of eggs. They're not going to know whether you sold your house for a profit or not. They're going to want to know, did you do everything in your power at that moment in history to make sure that we had that democracy survived? So really, history is watching you right now. We always think of history as something that happened in the past. I'm here to tell you, history right now is happening in the present.
Perfectly put. Marc, let's go to the next one, which is policy advocacy. Can you talk about why that's important?
So this is so important. It is never too late to influence how policy in this country influences elections or affects elections. There are still state legislatures that are meeting. And those state legislatures in some places are still trying to pass bad laws. We just saw Georgia, just in the last few days, enact a new bad voter suppression law. There are places that are considering good voting laws. And it is all of our role as a citizen, as a voter, to call our state and local election officials, representatives, and to tell them to pass pro-voter rules and pro-voter laws. At the county level, many places are considering, do we have 4 hours of early voting or on a Saturday before the election, or do we have 8 hours of early voting? Should we add, Brian, should we add one more polling location a little bit closer to the college or not, right? These policy decisions get made at the local level, at the hyper-local level, and the state level. And they believe that what they hear from the citizens represent not just that one citizen, but lots of voters and lots of citizens. So you could have an outsized impact by paying attention to what's happening in your county, what's happening in your state, and making phone calls, showing up at meetings, speaking out at town or county open forums about the importance of voting. And don't forget Congress. We're going to need a Democratic trifecta this fall to come in to be in power come next January. But they need to start hearing now that when they come into power, when Hakeem Jeffries is sworn in as Speaker, when Chuck Schumer is sworn in again as Majority Leader, when President Biden retakes the oath of office on January 20th of next year, that they know that they need to pass the Freedom to Vote Act, the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, and they need to make that among the first bills that they pass so that we can once and for all, stop having to play whack-a-mole with election deniers.
Yeah, and it's important to get those calls in and to ramp up the pressure. I mean, we just heard from Senator Marc Kelly, who is outright outspoken progressive. He's probably one of the more moderate members, if not the most moderate member of the Democratic caucus in the Senate, and he's come out for eliminating the filibuster. Think about how important that's going to be in terms of passing the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act, in terms of codifying Roe into law. So getting these people on the record now is important. Calling right now is important. You can have, to Mark's exact point, you can have an outsized impact by being one of the few people who actually do this. And you have to know that the lawmakers hear about it when people call. So be among those people who actually call and have an outsized influence, because you can. Mark, this is a really important one. Talk about the importance of election administration, about the importance of being a poll worker as we head into 2024 election.
Yeah, so it's critically important. We can talk all we want about the need to expand the franchise, make sure there are enough polling locations, make sure there's early voting. We can talk all we want about that, but all of those things require people. And we in this country have a highly decentralized system of administering elections that count on thousands and tens of thousands of volunteers and, frankly, near volunteers, people who accept very small stipends, to work the polls, to make sure that the polls open first thing in the morning and the machines are working, to work long days, till 6, 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night when the polls close, and then beyond that in closing up the polls, in being observers of the process to make sure that there are no problems, to be at the counties where those absentee ballots are oftentimes opened and processed, where you see throngs of people watching. And the problem is, we have seen, because of Republican intimidation and Republican efforts to deny the outcome of the 2020 election, we have seen a lot of people simply decide they don't want to be a part of that process again. It has forced out of the election administration world a lot of really good, committed people. So we need even more good, committed people to take their place. And there are some really vital organizations that, on a nonpartisan basis, recruit these poll workers and make sure that there are enough people in the roles. And there are lots of organizations, both partisan organizations like the Democratic Party and nonpartisan organizations that help put observers who are not working the polls but are resources, manning hotlines, and making sure that people who have questions are able to get those answered.
You know, Mark had said before, when your kids ask you what you did, when your grandkids ask you what you did when democracy was at stake, this is one of those moments where you can absolutely have an impact. We're going to partner with Power the Polls. So if you go to powerthepolls.org/democracywatch, I'll put that link in the post description, and right here on the screen, you can find out where you can be a poll worker, an election worker, anywhere in the country. So again, powerthepolls.org/democracywatch. Link is in the post description. It's also right here on the screen. That is an amazing way to make sure that we have people, to counterbalance the folks that are listening to Steve Bannon right now, who are staffing the polls right now to try to abuse the system. So we can be a counterbalance to exactly that.
Yeah, and let me add one thing to this.
Sure.
You may be out there thinking, all right, but I don't live in a swing state. They still need you. Power to the Polls is a great organization, and they help recruit and place poll workers all over the country. It's not just in the so-called swing states. You know why? Because if you're in New York or California, there are still elections within the state that are critically important that we need to make sure there are enough election officials. If you're in Alabama or Mississippi, it may not be competitive at the presidential election, but there are still local elections where we need to make sure there are enough good election officials. So this is really, wherever you live, this is a way you can contribute to democracy.
And I'll note, too, that the House this year will be won or lost depending on races in New York and California. So don't underestimate, the importance of these races just because you're in a true blue state, because there's always going to be districts, there's always going to be congressional districts where these races have outsized importance. And finally, Mark, let's talk about an issue that is obviously important to both of us, and that is the media. So what can we do on the media front, on the social media front, to help Democrats as we head toward this election?
Yeah, this is more important than ever. We no longer live in a world in which there are 2 or 3, news sources in any jurisdiction. There are thousands and thousands of news sources available, some giving good information, some giving bad information, some giving it on social media platforms that are better, and some giving it on platforms that are run by Donald Trump that I don't recommend going to. But it's important for all of us to share good, accurate information in a sea of a lot of disinformation and misinformation. So share and elevate progressive news outlets, like Democracy.com, which I founded in 2020 to be an accurate source of information about democracy and the courts. Make sure you are sharing Brian's videos far and wide through every channel available to you, including, by the way, word of mouth. So it's not just TikTok, it's not just Twitter, and it's not just Threads and all the rest. Tell people, I saw this video that Brian did with Marc Elias. You really ought to watch it. Or I saw this really important article on Democracy.com. Share it. Make sure your friends and family are literate about what's happening in the election. One of the problems we have is that a lot of people say, I don't want to vote because I don't really know what's going on. So share this information prolifically with them. Let them get a little bit annoyed that you're sending them so many articles from Democracy.com or so many videos that Brian does, either with me or with others, or other sources like that. Be a nudge about sharing good media, because it's never more important than it is right before an election.
Yeah, I agree. I think the media literacy point is especially important. Help your family be media literate. You will be confronted in this election cycle with foreign actors trying to influence your vote. It's happened in the last few elections. It is absolutely going to happen again. It's probably already happening. We won't know until after this election to what extent it pervaded our social media ecosystem. So just make sure that you're following reputable sources, that you're sharing from reputable sources, and not, baldeagle.america.freedom.net. I mean, make sure to help yourself and your family be able to follow accurate sources of information here. And finally, to finish off here, and I think this is especially important, let us know in the comments what you're going to be doing. I mean, we gave a whole list from the media to election administration, becoming a poll worker, policy advocacy, talking to your family, your friends, your town squares, and also supporting candidates. Let us know what you're doing. Put it in the comments. Help restore a little bit of our faith in humanity here, because like I said when I opened at the top, so much of what we hear in politics today leads us to despair. And I think this is a moment where we can really see the extent to which we have agency in all of this. So please let us know what you're doing, and you'll see from everybody else what everybody's doing as the result of this.
Yeah, and I just want to echo that. One of the questions I oftentimes get in comments or people say is, what gives you hope? What gives me hope is reading your comments. What gives me hope is hearing from you that you are in your local community standing up and making a difference. So please give us feedback, tell us what you're doing, because that is not just good for you. It's actually pretty good for me and pretty good for Brian also.
Yeah, I agree. And again, for those watching right now, if you want to support the invaluable work that Marc does, please sign up for Democracy Docket. I'll put the link right here on the screen. If you haven't yet checked out powerthepolls.org/democracywatch, I'll put that link on the screen. And of course, to subscribe and see more videos, that link is on the screen as well. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Marc Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.